Deployed.
We'll go ahead and get started. Is everybody ready to go? Welcome you to the Bureau of Narcotics. We're going to get started with a few opening remarks from the director, and that is John Scully. So I'll introduce John Scully, the director of the Bureau of Narcotics.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon and welcome to OBN to all of you. What we want to do today is provide some updated information to you on some of our efforts at OBN and the Attorney General's office to fight the opioid epidemic that's killing so many of our citizens right now. First thing I want to do is I want to start with some numbers. You've seen them before, but we'll go over some of these real quick. On a national level, drug overdose deaths, 2013, 43,982 U.S. citizens died of drug overdose deaths, with 14,145 being the result of prescription opioid overdose deaths. And as you can see from this chart, the numbers just keep going up on a national level, both for total overdose deaths and those that die from prescription opioid deaths. Next, let's look at the state. What's going on in the state of Oklahoma? Here you see that in 2013, for example, we had 779 Oklahomans that died of drug overdose deaths. 509 of those, 63%, were from prescription opioid drugs. And the numbers for overdose deaths total continued to go up all the way through 2016, where we had 899 Oklahomans die of drug overdose deaths. And last year, we're happy to report that those numbers went down to 796 Oklahomans that died of drug overdose deaths. 316 of those, or 39%, almost 40%, were from prescription opioid overdoses. So a lot of work is being done to help with this situation, but a lot more work needs to be done. We have a long way to go. OBN's critical strategies to address the opioid epidemic include education, prevention, enforcement, and partnering with other agencies to suppress the epidemic. In 2017, Attorney General Hunter formed an opioid commission, and our first meeting started August 29th of 2017. This commission brought together many disciplines and dedicated people from our state to address the opioid crisis. Concurrent with the work of the Opioid Commission, OBN evaluated our strategies and sought ways to enhance our efforts. Today, I'm going to highlight 3 such enhancements to our efforts to help curb the opioid epidemic. These efforts are consistent with discussions and recommendations of the Opioid Commission. First, I'd like to announce the release of OBN's Drug Threat Assessment. Our 2018 Drug Threat Assessment is available on our website. This is an annual comprehensive assessment of the drug threat in Oklahoma and how that it impacts all of our local communities. I think many of you have copies of that drug threat assessment that we've provided to you. Second, I'd like to announce that OBN has increased our resources dedicated to investigate the diversion of pharmaceutical drugs in Oklahoma. What you see here today are 10 new diversion investigators with OBN that are deployed throughout the state of Oklahoma to provide adequate investigative tools to impact the opioid epidemic. All 10 of these agents have law enforcement and investigative backgrounds. As we train and deploy our newest agents, we are committed to working together with our law enforcement partners and Attorney General Hunter to ensure that we do all we can to improve the quality of life for all of our citizens in all of our communities. The third program I'd like to announce today was born directly from the work of the Opioid Commission. ODMAP is a free law enforcement application that allows first responders to track overdoses across the state in real time. This data can be used by public safety and public health officials to track overdoses and spikes in overdoses, allowing officials to properly deploy resources in response to the crisis. At the conclusion of our press conference today, we're going to provide you a demonstration of how OD mapping works. At this time, It's my pleasure to welcome a great partner to all of us who is leading the fight in the opioid epidemic, Attorney General Mike Hunter.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, good afternoon, everybody. You know, Director, I can't thank you enough for your leadership in what we have been able to do over the last several months in connection with not only the Commission on Opioid Abuse, but what y'all do every day to save lives. And I look forward to our continued work together. We've still got a lot to do. You know, everybody who served on the Commission on Opioid Abuse, I want to say, for the record, put in many hours and personal resources to obtain the significant results that we were able to accomplish. So I want to continue to make that record and commend those members and the body of work, the results that we've been able to achieve. But with the several new legislative initiatives and recommendations similar to what we're talking about today, Director Scully, your agency's been asked to do a lot, and you didn't only accept those responsibilities, you jumped at the opportunity. So, again, I want to thank you and your team for stepping up in a big way as we fight literally for the hearts and minds and souls of Oklahomans who've been impacted by this epidemic. It is, simply put, a modern day plague. It has created a generation of addicts and a swath of destruction. And that swath of destruction is both heartbreaking and horrifying, both to our state and nation. You know, we faced other epidemics before in Oklahoma and in this country, but this crisis is different. It wasn't born in sordid alleyways with drug dealers selling heroin or crack cocaine. It isn't an airborne disease or a flu-like outbreak. This epidemic is man-made, and it can be traced back directly to corporate boardrooms, where company decisions made the decision to market as non-addictive a substance they knew to be addictive. Worse yet, it has evolved or devolved. 80% of heroin users attribute the beginning of their habit to a prescription to opioid pain medication. And what begins as a prescription so often leads people to illegal drugs. And we have seen it metastasize even further into forms of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that is deadly to the touch. So to put a face on this just quickly, I want to reference an opportunity I had to be with a really fine organization over in Tulsa, the Women in Recovery. They had a graduation of folks last week, and I was jarred by hearing their stories. The majority of women who stood up earlier this week to bravely share their stories of moving from tragedy to triumph, many confessed that they began their addiction on opioid pain medication. And as we see so frequently and tragically, they moved from that to street drugs to fuel their addiction when they couldn't find more pills. And from there, their lives spiraled until they wound up in jail or in prison. I can't say enough good things about the Women in Recovery program over in Tulsa. Those women that we saw graduate from that program earlier this week are heroes in my mind for their strength and willingness to get clean and get back into the world as productive members of society. But you know, they're lucky. They're lucky that they didn't end up in one of these statistical categories that Director Scully shared with us today. That statistical category that shows that thousands continue to die every year from an overdose. So, we see a stark reminder in this business every day of the reality that we must do more. And today's announcements are representations of the state's commitment, of OBN's commitment to doing more, to taking further action. And it's a continuation to make good on the recommendations of the Commission on Opioid Abuse. John, dedicating these 10 new officers today, who I'm privileged to get acquainted with, to focus on diversion and enforcing the new laws from the Commission's recommendations will help to better monitor manufacturers and distributors who are shipping opioids into the state, in addition to the other duties that the agents are going to be undertaking. They're in a position to help prevent a situation like the one many of us are familiar with, where over a 7-year period, a small town in West Virginia of 3,000 people received 20 million painkillers. Received 20 million painkillers into the two towns' pharmacies. We're going to have proper oversight going forward of medical facilities to prevent pill mills. We're going to investigate pill mills and shut them down. One of the tools that the OBN has now is the requirement and the ability to supervise these facilities, because until that law was passed, you didn't have to be a doctor to open a medical facility, and many times simply to encourage the oversupply of opioids. So, John, you have the commitment of the Office of Attorney General. We remain dedicated to working with you and these new agents. We've worked together in the past to solve cold cases, arrest drug dealers, and shut down pill mills. And we look forward to continuing with you on our partnership, which is a record of success. So, just as important, John is going to talk a little bit later about the OD mapping technology. It is going to be a tremendous asset. It was something we received testimony on at the Commission. We need more data and more accurate data on overdoses, both fatal and non-fatal. And the OD map gives us both. It is a proactive response to the state's opioid crisis. Its implementation was a top recommendation of the Commission. Again, the data collected will be a valuable tool in combating overdose deaths and addiction in our state. The real-time data that OD mapping provides allows for an immediate response, targeting hotspot areas and shutting down criminal drug dealers. This is an asset that we simply had to provide our law enforcement partners. And again, John, I applaud you and your agency for embracing the Commission and this recommendation and dedicating resources to train first responders around the state. We're going to end this crisis. And I think we've made significant strides in curbing the epidemic, but there's still much to do. But by working together on shared solutions like this and beyond, working this year and beyond, we will one day end this deadly crisis. We'll create a better future for Oklahomans and rescue drug dealers from the clutches, drug addicts from the clutches of their addiction, and hold drug dealers responsible. So, Director, thank you very much for including me. I know we all look forward to the demonstration and hearing more about it. Thank you. Thanks again. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
This is what's been happening in Oklahoma. Just some more numbers to reflect on. In 2013, and these are prescription opioid drug deaths, we had an Oklahoman die over 17 hours. Due to some hard work and dedication, now we have an Oklahoman that dies over 28 hours, but that's not good enough. And so we have to get this information out. We have to continue the fight on this opioid epidemic, because if we don't, then these numbers will go back in the direction we don't want them to go. So at this time, as promised, we are going to have Angie Woodrow, our research director, is going to come up here, and she is going to give you a demonstration on OD mapping.
Thank you very much. As the director said, OD mapping is a real-time surveillance tool on fatal and non-fatal overdoses. It was developed last year by the Washington-Baltimore HIDA. Since that time, there's over 2,000 agencies from 44 states that are using it. We began deploying OD mapping in June of this year. And since that time, we've worked with 3 pilot agencies. We've worked with LaFleur County, Custer County, and Garvin County. And so what I'm going to show you is how easy. It's a really simple system. I'm going to go through it really brief, and if you guys would like a longer demonstration, just let me know. But what happens when someone arrives, or first responder arrives to a scene, is they will enter the information on their phone. So it's just a phone app. It asks for 9 pieces of information. As soon as they enter that into the system, it goes live into this national system. This system that you guys see up here, this system is reviewed and analyzed by public health officials and public safety officials, and it's used to identify spikes and to identify trends in overdoses. So this is, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. This is Oklahoma. These are all of the fatal overdoses that we've put in the system since January 1st of last year. I told you guys we were working with LaFleur County. This is an example of LaFleur County. These are non-fatal overdoses. So each one of these overdoses have been submitted using the app and then put into this system. One of the neat things about OD mapping is it has a spike alert. So an agency can decide that if there's a certain number of overdoses, say Oklahoma County could decide if there's 5 overdoses within a 24-hour period, then they want a spike alert so they can mobilize resources, and this system will do that for them. The goal is to mobilize resources as quick as we can and to save lives as fast as possible. And that is a brief demonstration on OD mapping. Director?
Thank you, Angie. As we near the end of our press conference, this is the time that we want to provide you an opportunity. If you have any questions, you can ask questions of us, and we will answer those questions for you. Yes,
so when you look at these fatal and non-fatal overdoses, are you looking to see, if you see a lot in an area, you're thinking there's a pill mill operating in there and it needs closer scrutiny? Is that what you're trying to look for?
It could be, but it's important to keep in mind that we don't just put prescription opioid overdoses in the OD map. So we have to drill down and look and identify what drug is suspected of creating the overdose situation to determine what method we want to approach in the investigation. One of the real important things, and she spoke to the spike alerts, is that's what we really want to accomplish with this as we push this OD map out across the state. The more data we can get into this system, the more we're going to have a really good picture in real time of what's going on. So if we can find out what's happened in the last 24, 48 hours, that enables us to deploy resources to try to address what, like for example, if the Attorney General mentioned fentanyl a while ago. If we had heroin laced with fentanyl that got into a community and all of a sudden over the weekend we saw a bunch of overdose deaths, then that's going to allow us to know exactly what we need to go out and try to do. Yes. Any other questions? Okay. Well, that concludes our press conference today. Thank you very much for being here.
Is this being deployed statewide now, or is it still at 3 counties? Or?
It's been deployed statewide. We've started out with some of the smaller jurisdictions to make sure that we know how the system works and get any bugs worked out. We're looking to try to move that towards some of the larger areas, such as Oklahoma City. But what we're looking for there is to try to identify a way to integrate that in with their computer systems, so that when an officer responds to an overdose and makes a report, then it would automatically go into the RMS, and then it would automatically populate the overdose mapping. In Baltimore, Washington area, where this is mandatory, it's mandated there, they have systems in place up there to accomplish that.
But it's not immediately going to be statewide?
Not immediately.
Gradually.
Right. What is immediate, though, is any drug overdose deaths, we get that information from the ME's office, and that gets populated in right away. So that, for the purposes of that, it is statewide. And the medical examiner's office, we've met with them, and they've committed to starting to use OD mapping, so that'll help us get the information quicker.
So the other overdoses are just those 3 counties right now, the non-fatal ones?
Yes. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, thank you for being here today.